Hello guys, welcome to today's class. In this video, I'll do a full practice of the SAT practice test 8. You can always get this from the official website um, for College Board. In this video, I'll focus on just Module 1 for the reading and writing section. So, let's begin. Number 1. As Mexico's first president from an indigenous community, Benito Juarez became one of the most dashed figures in his country's history. Among the many significant accomplishments of his long tenure in office, Juarez consolidated the authority of the national government and advanced the rights of indigenous peoples. Most which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? Now, all you have to do here is understand the preceding text or preceding sentences and what follows. Here it says one of the most dashed figures, which means it's an adjective, obviously. What is going to describe him? Here it says among the many significant accomplishments, which means he had significant accomplishments, and then amongst them is that he consolidated the authority of the national government and advanced the rights of indigenous people. So he did something beneficiary, which was one of many. So obviously it cannot be unpredictable, it cannot be secretive, and it most certainly was not ordinary because he had significant accomplishments. So the answer is B. Number 2, Monica Lopez Ferreira and others at Brazil's Butantan Institute are studying the freshwater stingray species Potamo trigon rex to determine whether biological characteristics such as the race, age, and sex have dash effect on the toxicity of their venom. So basically, do their biological features have an effect on the toxicity of their venom? That is to see if differences in these traits are associated with considerable variations in venom potency. So the clue here, as usual, will be to understand the context. Here we see considerable. So it says to determine whether biological characteristics such as race, age, and sex have dash effect. That is, which means the sentence that comes after that is explains the previous one. That is to see if differences in these traits are associated with considerable variations. So whatever we pick has to be something that would mean considerable variations, right? So it's obviously not disconcerting because disconcerting would imply something that is uncomfortable, something that is troubling, and that's not necessarily the point of this paragraph. Unacceptable, I don't think there is an acceptable effect based on the context. Imperceptible would mean something minute, something small, so that cannot be correct because it doesn't align with considerable. The one that is closest to considerable here is substantial, so number 2 is the answer. Let's move on. Number 3. Kelp forests grow underwater along the eastern Pacific coast. These underwater forests are important to fish and other marine animals. Ocean currents can be powerful and rough, making it difficult for animals to find safe places to hide from predators. The underwater forests slow down the currents. This creates a more dash environment. So if the currents are powerful and the kelp forest helps to, slow down the currents. What does that mean? Something that was unsafe before, and now because of kelp forest, it becomes a bit safer. So, what does it create? It creates a more dash environment with calmer waters where animals can take shelter. So, emphasis on calmer waters and slow down. It cannot be dangerous because if it's dangerous, it cannot be calmer and doesn't corroborate the fact that they take shelter. So it cannot be dangerous. It's not imaginative either. I don't think I need to explain that. It's not surprising. It's tranquil. I think these are questions that you should have no problems answering. That's why I'm not spending so much time on them. Number four, The Mule Bone, in 1930 play written by Zora Neale Huston and Langston Hughes, is perhaps the best known for the few examples of dash in literature. So this play rather, is perhaps the best known for the few examples of something in literature. So for us to know what it's an example of, we just need to keep reading. Most writers prefer working alone, and given that working together cost Huston and Hugh their friendship, it is not hard to see why. So characterization will be wrong, interpretation will be wrong, collaboration is correct. It's obviously not commercialization. It says it's one of the few examples of something in literature that is, and it goes on to say most writers prefer working alone. So what would be the opposite of working alone? Collaborating. All right. Ophelia Zepida's contributions to the field of linguistics are dash. So an adjective. Her many accomplishments include working as a linguistics professor and bilingual poet, authoring the first Tohono O Odam grammar book, and co-founding the American Indian Language Development Institute, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase. Alright, the most practical, pragmatic, no. I don't think this is pragmatic. Controversial, no. Universal, no. She's not universal because she focused on um, her accomplishments were more on the first Tohono Odam grammar book, so it doesn't suggest universality. It suggests more of extensive because it's extensive. It says many accomplishments include working, so she has many accomplishments, so it's extensive. Number six, archaeologists studying the ancient city of Pompeii. Now, but before I go on, I want you to do something. When preparing for the SAT test, when you see words in questions like this, for instance, tranquil, dangerous, imaginative, surprising, characterization, all of these words, even if you know their meanings, have a book where you write down the words and put down the dictionary meaning. When you do that, you will learn new words and become more confident about words you already knew before. Because some of these words reappear and it's safer to learn now than to get to the test and find that you don't know the meaning of a certain word. So yeah, that's just a clue or a tip. So number six, archaeologists studying the ancient city of Pompeii in Italy recently discovered a well-preserved food shop known as Thermopolium. The site contains food remains, artworks, and decorations. These items give researchers a better understanding of what daily life in Pompeii may have been like. For example, the archaeologists found a ceramic jar that they believe likely contained a meat and seafood stew. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Now, without looking at the options, we can tell that this paragraph talks about a food shop and the fact that it gives us an idea of what um, life was like back then. So, which choice best states the main purpose of the text? To compare ancient works with modern ones, to discuss the political system of Italy, to present a recent archaeological discovery, to describe a region's um, climate. This is wrong, obviously. It doesn't say um, anything about climate. To present a recent archaeological discovery, this is correct. It's not to discuss the political system of Italy. A may seem correct because it talks about artworks, does it? It mentions artworks here, but that's not the actual focus because it also talks about food remains, also talks about decorations, it talks about meat and seafood, So it's not just about artwork. And more importantly, it doesn't compare. Doesn't compare it with modern ones. So this is wrong as well. So the focus is on a recent archaeological discovery. It says archaeologists studying the ancient city of Pompeii in Italy recently discovered a well-preserved food. Now, a tip for you: when identifying the main idea, the first sentence plays, or the first two sentences and the last sentence play a significant role. It's simply called skimming. When you read the first sentence, the second, and the last, you simply make a deduction from the three of those sentences I just talked about, the first, second, and last, or first and last. You make a deduction of what is being talked about. So here it's a recent archaeological discovery. All right. So C is correct. Number 7. The following text is from Sarah Owens Duet's 1899 short story, Martha's Lady. Martha is employed by Miss Pine as a maid. Before I read the extract, let's quickly read the question. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Now, when taking a SAT test, you may not have time to go through everything for some passages, but for extracts like this, I recommend, but for fictional extracts or what you call literary passages, I recommend reading the entire thing. So, what is the main purpose of the text? Miss Pine sat by the window watching in her best dress, looking stately and calm. She seldom went out now, and it was almost time for the carriage. Martha was just coming in from the garden with the strawberries and with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. The golden robins sang in the elms, and the sun was going down behind the apple trees at the foot of the garden. The beautiful old house stood wide open to the long expected guests. So the options are: so what is the main purpose? A, to convey the worries brought about by new guests, to describe how the characters have changed over time, to contrast the activity indoors with the stillness outside, to depict this setting as the characters await a visitor's arrival. Martha was just coming in from the garden with the strawberries and with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. It was almost time for the carriage. So she was outside watching in her best dress, and it's almost time for the carriage. So there's a carriage coming. Martha was just coming from the garden with strawberries and with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. I don't think A is correct because it doesn't say anything about worries. So it cannot be A. She's not. This does not suggest worry. In fact, it suggests a bright, good day. To describe how characters have changed over time, obviously not. It doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't compare characters. Um, to contrast the activity indoors with the stillness outside. No, that was a thing. That was a supporting detail. It described the activities, but that was not the focus. It says the beautiful old house stood wide open to the long expected guests. So it cannot be C either. It's D, to depict the setting as the characters await a visitor's arrival. So it's describing the setting, describes Miss Pine waiting at the window, describes Martha coming from the garden, describes the old place. And the last sentence says the beautiful old house stood wide open to the long expected guests. Remember what I said? When you read the first sentence and the second sentence, as well as the last, you can make a deduction. So first it talks about Miss Pine waiting, talks about Martha coming from the garden, then it says the old house stood wide open, the long expected guest. So D is correct. Number 8. The following text is adapted from Afra Ben's 1689 novel, The Lucky Mistake. Atlant and Rinaldo are neighbors who have been secretly exchanging letters through Charlotte, Atlant's sister. So the question is, which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? Structure. Atlant gave this letter to Charlotte, who immediately ran into the balcony with it, where she still found Rinaldo in a melancholy posture, leaning his head on his hand. She showed him the letter but was afraid to toss it to him for fear it might fall to the ground, so he ran and fetched a long cane which he cleft at one end, and held it while she put the letter into the cleft, and stayed not to hear what is said to it. But never was man so transported with joy as was at the reading of this letter. It gives him new wounds, for to the generous nothing obliges love so much as love. Okay, which choice best describes the overall structure? It describes the delivery of a letter and then portrays the character's happiness at reading that letter. It establishes that the character is desperate to receive a letter and then explains why another character has not yet written the letter. It presents a character's concerns. It presents the character's concerns about delivering a letter and then details the contents of the letter. Does it detail the content? Not sure about that. It reveals the inspiration behind the character's letter and then emphasizes the excitement that another character feels upon receiving the letter. It's definitely not. It's not B and it's not C. It reveals the inspiration behind the character's letter and then emphasizes the excitement that another character feels upon receiving that letter. Let's see. Atlant gave this letter to Charlotte, who immediately ran into the balcony. I don't think it reveals the inspiration. What it does here is the first thing, the structure is that it first starts by describing how the letter got to the receiver. So it describes the delivery of a letter first. Then it says, but never was a man so transported with joy. So, and then portrays the character's happiness. So it should be A. Delivery of the letter first, then the happiness of the character. All right. Let's proceed to number 9. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole? Now, do not fall into the trap of reading just the underlined portion. Read the entire paragraph so you understand the context. Context matters in questions like this. According to historian Vicky L. Ruiz, Mexican American women made crucial contributions to the labor movement during World War II. At the time, food processing companies entered into contracts to supply United States Armed Forces with canned goods. Increased production quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees. Increased production quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees, many of whom were Mexican American women. Employees insisted on more favorable benefits, and employers who were anxious to fulfill the contracts complied. Thus, labor activism became a platform for Mexican American women to assert their agency. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion? So, employees insisted on more favorable benefits. Okay, so it elaborates a claim about labor relations in a particular. It offers an example of a trend in the World War II era. It notes a possible exception to the historical narrative. It provides further details about the identities of the workers discussed earlier in the text. Yes, it's A. There was a claim earlier that American women made crucial contributions to the labor movement. Now we now proceed here to explain. These employees insisted. You see, it says many of whom were American women. Now a colon is used to introduce an explanation. So here, after mentioning Mexican American women, it goes on to explain what they did. Employees insisted on more favorable benefits. So this simply buttresses this or explains it or provides more details. That's why A is correct. It's not B or C, obviously. I can understand why someone may think it's D, provides further details about the identity of the workers, but it doesn't provide details about the identities. It doesn't. It's wrong. So it's A. When answering questions, do not be in a haste. Go through each option, confirm from the paragraph. Number 10, for many years, the only existing fossil evidence of Mixoteride, Euroterids, an extinct family of large aquatic arthropods known as sea scorpions and related to modern arachnids and horseshoe crabs. So far we know that these Mixoterid and Euroterids are also known as sea scorpions and are related to arachnids and horseshoe crabs. Came from four species living on the paleocontinent of Laurasia. So the fossils that were found before were usually four species in this location. In a discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of Mixoterids, paleontologists Bo Wang and others have identified fossilized remains of a new Mixoterid species, Pteroteros josanensis, that lived over 400 million years ago on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. So, what basically, for many years, we had just four species, and they were found in the paleocontinent of Laurasia. But now we found another. We found more species in a new place. Over 400 million years ago on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. So, according to the text, why was Wang and his team's discovery of the Pteroteros fossil significant? So, in a discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of Mixoterids. So, why was it important? It expands our understanding. Expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of Mixoterids. So, let's check. The fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that the fossil helps to establish the Mixoterids are more closely related. The fossil helps to establish a more accurate timeline of the evolution. Fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that existed outside the paleocontinent of Laurasia. So it says it expands on terms of the geographical distribution of extraterrestrials. You need to be very careful when answering this kind of questions. It says in a discovery that expands our understanding of the what? The geographical. What does geographical mean? Location, right? It means location. So obviously, we have to look for something that addresses locations here. It's not A, because it says the first considers the first evidence found by scientists that Mixoterids lived more than 400 million years ago. That's not what it expanded our knowledge of. The first helps establish that Mixoterids are more closely related to modern anatomy. That's not true. We already knew that. The fossils helps establish a more accurate timeline of the evolution of Mixoterids. That's also not true. So it's D. The fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that Mixoterids existed outside the paleocontinent of Laurasia. This is correct because at first they only knew there were four species in this continent, Laurasia, but now we know that they are also on Gondwana. It says in a discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution. So it's location that is the key word there. Geographical. I hope that was clear. Let's move on. Number 11, this is command of evidence. Video game availability. The first thing you want to do is understand the graphic, the table, whatever it is, understand it. Here it says video game availability by initial release years. So in 1975 to 1979, 0.89% of the games are still available. 1980 to 84, 3.65. That increased drastically to 15.38 from 85 to 89. 1990 to 94, 19.33. 1995 to 1999, there seems to be a notable drop. So those are things you need to notice. Lowest, slightly lower, sharp increase, peak, or you could say plateau. So we say plateaued. Um, the game spells plateaued. And then drop. So increase, increase. But this is the biggest increase. These are things you need to do so you understand the table properly, even before you read the paragraph or the passage. In a recent study, researchers found that relatively few video games released over the decades remain available today. For example, relatively few. Okay, for example, only 14.22% of games are still available that were initially released in. So obviously, this is quite an easy question. B. It says only 14.22%. 14.22% of games are still that were initially released in what year? So they were released in 1995 to 1999. That's why B is correct. Let's do the same for number 12. Depths at which 4 deep sea fish species live. So we have a table that shows the species and a table that shows the depth below the ocean surface. Football fish go 200 to 1000 meters below ocean surface. Southern stoplight loose jaw go 500 to 2000. Black sea devil go 250 to 2000. Bolon's rat tail go 300 to 800. So, all right, we can just compare. We can see that Southern stoplight and Black sea devil can go the lowest, can go the deepest, and then the one that is closer to the surface, in a sense, is the Bolon's rat tail. All right. Some, excuse me, some oceanic fish species live very deep underwater. Researchers collected data about the depths at which various species live. Based on the information in the table, at what depth does the southern stoplight loose jaw live? Southern stoplight loose jaw. A, more than 2000 meters below surface. That's incorrect because it doesn't say more than, it says 500 to 2000. 150 to 400 meters below the surface. Wrong. 500 to 2000 meters below the surface. Correct. 250 to 500. Wrong. It's 500 to 2000. All right. Housing starts in the US January to April 2022 in thousands. I Housing starts, okay, that is people who began to build, I'm guessing, in thousands. So month January, February, March, April, we see the highest housing starts in April, highest, um second, third, lowest. So when construction of a single family house begins, it is called a housing start. So construction, they've defined what housing start is. In the first 4 months of 2022, the highest number of housing starts in the United States was in, that should be February. So D.
Wow, I just made a mistake. It's not D, it's 1803. So that's April. April. That's A. That's why one of the things you must inculcate or rehearse or practice is going back to check your answer. I totally forgot about this and I lost looked at February, which was a mistake on my part, but you must always check your answers before you move on to be sure. That's important. Number 14. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's claim? So, whatever you have to do two things here. You have to first identify the student's claim. That's chief. That's very key here. Identify the student's claim, and then how do you do that? You read the paragraph, the excerpt, or the extract, and then once you understand the claim, you look for something that most directly supports it, not just supports it partially, but most directly. So let's identify the claim. Born in 1891, remember it's the student's claim and not the claim of the entire paragraph. The student's claim. Don't mix that up. The student's claim is different from the author's claim. The author may have a claim that is not the student's claim. So let's pay attention. Even if it does not apply here, it could apply to another passage. So be careful. Born in 1891 to a Quechua speaking family in the Andes Mountains of Peru, Martin Chambi is today considered to be one of the most renowned figures of Latin American photography. In a paper for an art history class, a student claims that Chambi's photographs have considerable ethnographic value. So he's saying there is an ethnographic value to his photographs. In his work, Chambi was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society, representing his subjects with both dignity and authenticity. So the claim is that it has ethnographic value, and after the dash here, you see it explains what it means by ethnographic value. He captured diverse elements of Peruvian society, representing his subjects with both dignity and authenticity. Who are his subjects? The Peruvian people. So, diverse elements. That's the value. So, which finding, if true, would most directly support the student's claim? A. Chambi took many commissioned portraits of wealthy Peruvians, but he also produced hundreds of images carefully documenting the people's sites and customs of indigenous community of the Andes. I'm not so sure about this. Chambi's photographs demonstrate the high level of technical skill as seen in the strategic use of. No, this is not correct. During his lifetime, Chambi was known and celebrated both within and outside his native Peru, as his work was published in places like Argentina, Spain, and Mexico. Some of the peoples and places Chambi photographed had long been popular subjects for Peruvian photographers. This is tricky. I'm not sure. I don't think this is correct because it doesn't say anything about this. Let's read A again. Chambi took many commissioned portraits of wealthy Peruvians, but he also produced hundreds of images, carefully documenting the people's sites and customs of indigenous communities of the Andes. Let's read the passage. Born in 1891 to a Quechua speaking family in the Andes Mountains of Peru. A is tricky because it says Peruvians here, which is in line with the point. Here it says, but he also produced hundreds of images, carefully documenting the people's sites and customs of the Andes. So you may think Andes is a separate place, but it says here Andes Mountains of Peru. So Andes is also where the Peruvian people are. So it is A. It cannot be D because this does not directly support the claim of the fact that it had ethnographic value and that he was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society. So it's not D. But A does prove that he captured diverse elements of Peruvian society. It says hundreds of images, carefully documenting the peoples, sites, and customs. So it's A. You must be careful. Like I said, do not rush. Always go back to read each option and confirm again from the passage. Number 15.
Researchers hypothesized that the decline in the population of dusky sharks near the mid-Atlantic coast of North America led to a decline in the population of eastern oysters in the region. They hypothesized a decline in the population of dusky sharks near the mid-Atlantic coast of North America led to a decline in the population of eastern oysters in the region. They are saying because of the decline of dusky sharks, there's also a decline in eastern oysters in that same region. That's the mid-Atlantic coast of North America. So those are key things. Dusky sharks do not typically consume eastern oysters, but do consume cow-nose rays, which are the main predators of the oyster. So let's understand this first. So dusky sharks eat cow-nose rays. Cow-nose rays eat eastern oysters. So because there are no more dusky sharks, or because they are reducing, that means cow-nose rays are not being eaten at the usual rate, and that would imply that those cow-nose rays are also eating the eastern oysters because they are not being eaten. So yeah, that's it. A eats C, C eats B. So if A stops eating C, C will continue to eat B, basically. So A being sharks, C being cow-nose rays, and B being oysters. So which finding, if true, would most directly support the researchers' hypothesis? Remember what we just deduced. So let's read the hypothesis. It says most directly support the hypothesis. Declines in the regional abundance of dusky sharks prey other than cow-nose rays are associated with regional declines in dusky shark abundance. Dusky shark abundance? No. Eastern oyster abundance tends to be greater in areas with both dusky sharks and cow-nose rays than in areas with only dusky sharks. That's not true. Consumption of eastern oysters by cow-nose rays in the region substantially increased before the regional decline in dusky shark abundance began. No. Cow-nose rays have increased in regional abundance as dusky sharks have decreased in regional. D. That should be correct. Let's take a look at it again. D says cow-nose rays have increased in regional abundance. Why? Because dusky sharks are no longer there, they are declining. And that's because dusky sharks have decreased in regional abundance. That's what we just saw here. Researchers hypothesized that a decline in the population of dusky sharks near the mid-Atlantic coast of North America led to a decline in the population of eastern oysters. So, dusky sharks do not typically consume eastern oysters, but do consume cow-nose rays, which are the main predators of the oysters. So if dusky sharks are declining, then it simply implies that cow-nose rays are increasing. So it's D. All right. Hang in there. We've got, say, about 18 questions to go. Number 16. The mountains of Brazil, Babycena tomentosa and Babycena macrantha, two plants in the Velocaceae family, establish themselves on soilless, nutrient-poor patches of quartzite rock. Plant ecologists Anna Abrahau and Patricia De Brito Costa used microscopic analysis to determine that the roots of B. tomentosa and B. macrantha, which grow directly into the quartzite, have clusters of fine hairs near the root tip. Further analysis indicated that these hairs secrete both malic and citric acids. The researchers hypothesized that the plants depend on dissolving underlying rock with these acids, as the process not only creates channels for continued growth but also releases phosphates that provide a vital uh, nutrient, phosphorus. All right, let's break that down. There are two plants, Babycena tomentosa and Babycena macrantha. Now, these plants can thrive even where there is no soil. So some ecologists and Abrahu and these two ecologists found out that the roots of these two plants have fine hairs near the root tip. So let's assume this is the root. They have fine hairs near the root tip. And these fine hairs secrete both malic and citric acids. Let's say this is the rock. They secrete both malic and citric acid that dissolves the rock. Which means as it dissolves the rock, the root is able to penetrate. Right? So the process not only creates channels for continued growth, but also releases phosphate that provides the vital nutrient phosphorus. So basically it does two things: the citric acid and malic acid break the rocks and also create nutrients. So which finding, if true, would most directly support the researchers' hypothesis? A. Other species in the Velocity family are found in terrains with more soil but have root structures similar to those. I don't think this supports it directly. Through B, though B tomentosa and B macrantha both secrete citric acid, each species produce the acids in different proportions. This does not directly support it. The roots of B tomentosa and B macrantha carve new entry points into rock, even when cracks in the surface are readily available. Let's take note of this. B tomentosa and B macrantha thrive even when transferred to the surfaces of rocks that do not contain phosphates. Is that the main point? The main point is that they are able to um, penetrate rocks where there are no soils, right? So it is likely C. It is C because it says it carves new entry points, and that's true. When they secrete citric and malic acid, it dissolves the rock. So even if there was an original entry point, it still dissolves the rock. So it is C. I don't think it's D because the point was not about phosphates. Phosphates was just a supporting detail. But also, you see, it's not the main point. The main point was that they dissolve on the underlying rock. So that's another way to know when something is a distractor. The fact that it supports a supporting detail does not make it correct. And if you're about to argue that yes, the passage says something about phosphates, look at the question. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the researcher's hypothesis? What is the hypothesis? Indicated that these hairs secrete both malic and citric acid. Their researchers hypothesize that the plants depend on dissolving underlying rock with these acids, as the process not only creates channels for continued growth, but also releases phosphate. So, what is the hypothesis? The plants depend on dissolving underlying rock with these acids. So, the main hypothesis is that they dissolve underlying rocks. So they carve new entry points into rocks, even when cracks in the surface are readily available. I have to spend more time on this one, so it's very clear. It's C, not D. Number 17. Many mosquito repellents contain natural components that work by activating multiple odor receptors on mosquitoes' antennae. Many mosquito repellents contain natural-like components that work by activating multiple odor receptors on mosquitoes' antennas. As the insects develop resistance, new repellents are needed. Kidong and her team found that EBF, a molecular component of chrysanthemum flower extract, can repel mosquitoes by activating just one odor. So in the past, the repellents activate multiple odor receptors, but this particular one activates just one odor receptor, and this receptor OR31. So mosquitoes have OR31. It's present in all mosquito species. Good. Known to carry disease. So all mosquitoes that are known to carry disease contain OR31 receptors, and EBF repels them. Alright. Therefore, the researchers suggest that in developing new repellents, it would most be useful to dash which choice most logically completes the text. So with what do we know so far before we look for what completes the text? We know that in the past, repellents were produced that activated multiple odor receptors on mosquitoes, and now they're becoming resistant to it. But now somebody has found that there is something in a flower called EBF that is effective on all mosquitoes because they all have this OR31. So, what would be the best logical completion? Let's look at the options. A. Identify molecular components similar to EBF that target the activation, while identify similar ones when you already have EBF. Investigate alternative methods for extracting EBF. Were we told anything about one method not being good enough? Why didn't you look for alternative methods? Verify the precise locations of OR31 and other odor receptors on mosquitoes' antennas. We already know they have it, so why are we verifying? Determine the maximum number of different odor receptors that can be activated by a single. We already know all that carry diseases. So let's check again. Identify molecular components similar to EBF that target the activation of OR31 receptors. I think this is the best one so far. Investigate alternative methods. No. Verify the precise. I don't think so. I think it should be A. It is A. Because identify molecular components similar to EBF that since all the mosquitoes have OR31 and EBF repels mosquitoes that have this OR31, then why not look for more like EBF? Yeah, A is correct. B to D are wrong. A is correct. Alright, let's proceed. Number 18. Birds of many species ingest foods containing carotenoids, pigmented molecules that are converted into feather coloration. Birds of many species ingest foods containing carotenoids, pigmented molecules that are converted into feather coloration. So basically, when they eat certain foods that contain this, it helps to color their feathers. Okay, coloration tends to be especially saturated in male birds' feathers, and because carotenoids also confer health benefits, the deeply saturated colors generally serve to communicate what is known as an honest signal of a bird's overall fitness to potential mates. So basically, the brighter your feather, the more healthy you are. However, ornithologist Alison J. Schultz and others have found that males in several species of the Tanager genus Ramphocelos use microstructures in their feathers to manipulate light. So that would imply that even if it is bright, it doesn't mean they are healthy, creating the appearance of deeper saturation without the birds necessarily having to maintain a carotenoid-rich diet. This finding suggests that what? So this is what we know so far before we look at which choice most logically completes the text. What we saw is when birds eat carotenoid pigmented molecules, their birds are brighter, their wings are brighter or their feathers are brighter, and that means they are healthy. But some birds are deceptive. They use light to manipulate their feathers to look brighter or to look to have more color. To have more color. And when they do this, they're not necessarily very healthy, but it looks as if they are. So which choice most logically completes the text? It says this finding suggests that dash. Individual male tornadoes can engage in honest signaling without relying on carotenoid. I think this makes this incorrect, but let's go on. Feather microstructures may be less effective than deeply saturated feathers. Feather microstructures may be less effective than deeply saturated feathers for signaling overall fitness. Scientists have yet to determine why tigers have a preference for males with colorful. No, this is wrong. A male tiger's appearance may function as a dishonest signal of the individual's overall fitness. I think it is D. I think it's D. Because it is dishonest
and it is a certain signal of the individual's overall fitness. We were told earlier that when you have a dark shade of feather, it means you're healthy. But because they can manipulate with the light, it's a dishonest signal. It is not. You may think they're healthy, but they're not. So it is D. So because of this honesty here, that's why A is wrong. Feather microstructures may be less effective than deeply saturated feathers. This is not true. So it is D. Number 19. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So this is just testing for um, two things. When you see conventions of standard English, just is testing for what's it called now? Punctuation, subject and verb agreement, and sentence structure. So when you see any question that talks about conventions of standard English, just that's what these are the three things it could test for: punctuation, subject verb agreement, and sentence structure. So in this case, I'm guessing it's subject verb agreement as well as sentence structure. When writing The Other Black Girl, novelist Zakiya Dalila Harris drew on her own experiences working at a publishing office. The award-winning book is Harris's first novel, but her writing honored before. I think this one is very clear, right? A writing honored before. So before implies past tense. Writing is one, so present tense. So it is has been honored before. C. It's not where. It's not are. It's not have been because this should be indicate plural. So no. So it has been honored before. If you say it's past tense, why is it not where? Where would imply that it's no longer honored? Alright, let's go on. 20. In order to prevent non-native fish species from moving freely between the Mediterranean and Red Seas, marine biologist Bella Galil has proposed that the saline lock system be installed along the Suez Canal in Egypt's Great Bitter Lakes. The lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and dash a natural barrier of water most marine creatures would be unable to cross. The lock would increase simple present. This is where you talk about parallelism. Also, subject verb agreement. Parallelism. If you start with one tense, you have to stick with it. So, the lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and would create a natural barrier. So, you have to just stick to it. The lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and would create a natural barrier. So, it is B. Alright, 21. Paintings by the renowned 20th century US Dash were featured in Artist to Artist, an exhibition at the Smithsonian Art Museum that paired the works of artists whose career trajectories intersected in meaningful ways. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So here we're being tested for knowledge of punctuation. Paintings by the renowned 20th century US artists Thomas Art Benton and Jackson Pollock were featured. This is wrong because there is no need for a comma before the and. The only time you have a comma before an and is when you're joining independent clauses to form a compound sentence. So this is wrong. Thomas Benton and Jackson Pollock. Huh.
So the answer is between B and D. It's not A either, because a colon is only there to introduce a new point, like to introduce an explanation, and this is not an explanation. Thomas Art Benton and Jackson Pollock were featured in Artist to Artist, an exhibition that players whose characters. This cannot be A, because if you read from Thomas down to Wace, it doesn't make sense on its own without paintings by the renowned 20th century um, artist. It won't make sense alone, so I don't think it's a colon, so it's not A. So it's between B and D. Should there be a comma before Thomas? Paintings by the renowned 20th century US artist Thomas Art Benton. Should we separate these two? Is there a need to separate them? I don't think so. Because Thomas Art Benton and Jackson Pollock are the artists. So there's no need to separate them, isn't it? So B is correct. Paintings by the renowned 20th century US artist Thomas Art. So uh, the teachers, Ali and John, are here. So there's only for a comma. If you insert a comma, you are implying that the artist and Thomas Hart Benton are different people. So it's like, if you add a comma here, it's like saying you're listing. You're listing and you're saying the artists are different from Thomas Hart Benton. So if you say paintings by the renowned 20th century US artist Thomas Hart Benton, like that's like separating them and then implying that they're not the same people. But when you don't separate them, you're implying that they're the same persons. So it's B. In 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor Grace Hopper was recruited by the US military to help the war effort by solving complex equations. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Alright, so the answer is it should be A, in my opinion. It should be A, because you must be careful. It's not this, it's not this, and it's not. Let's explain why it's not C. In 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor Grace Hopper was recruited by the US military to help achieve something. Now, this was why she was employed in 1943. The next sentence is now explaining that that was not her only achievement. And that is why the though will follow the next sentence and not as a pioneering computer programmer. It is Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. So the though is part of Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though, which is contrasting with the previous sentence in 1943. Blah blah blah. Assuming it was with though as a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. That would be wrong, because though will not contradict Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. It's rather say, therefore, if it was with this sentence. So it is A, and then the colon comes before as a pioneering computer programmer, which explains what they mean by it involves more than just equations. It is not C, it is A. Here you have to apply knowledge on punctuation, sentence structure, sentence/paragraph structure, and transition words. Um, We have a video on this already. You can always check it out. I'm working on this punctuation and sentence paragraph structure. I believe we've discussed structure before, so you can check the video out. Number 23. Increased gender diversity is revitalizing the field of economics, according to Harvard's Claudia Goldin. The trailblazing accomplishment of Goldin, winner of the 2023 Nobel Prize in Economics for her work on women in the labor force, dash to the value of scholars. In this case, it is a test of subject-verb agreement. In the English language, when you have a non-essential clause occurring between a subject and its verb, you ignore that non-essential clause. The non-essential clause is always coming after a comma. It's always separated by commas. There's a comma here, there's a comma here. So from winner, let me do this again. From winner down to labor force is a non-essential clause. By non-essential, we mean we can read that sentence without it. So we can say the trailblazing accomplishments of Goldin dash to the value of scholars of diverse backgrounds inspiring research. So it is attests. It's not as attested. It's not is attesting. It's attests because it says the trailblazing accomplishments. Oh, accomplishments. It's not attests. It's attests because it's plural, isn't it? It's plural, so it's attest. Because it says accomplishments, plural, and a plural noun takes a plural verb. A plural verb does not have an S. A singular verb has an S, so it cannot be A. It's D. Attest. So it's D. All right, 24. During the English, there's a chance what we applied here will be applied here. Whenever you see commas, semicolons, or whatever, it's similar. So let's look at it. The same rules. During the English neoclassical period, many writers imitated the epic poetry and satires of ancient Greece and Rome. They were not the first in England to adopt the literary modes of classical dash. Some of the most, so you see, the same thing. During the English neoclassical period, many writers limited the epic poetry and satires of ancient, imitated the epic poetry and satires of ancient Greece and Rome. So he's saying many writers imitated ancient Greece and Rome. Many writers. They were not the first in England to adopt the literary modes of classical antiquity, however. So it is C. Because the however is with this they were not. All you have to do is to bring however to the front of the sentence and you see how it's saying, okay, many English linguistic period writers did something. However, they were not the first in England to adopt the literary modes of classical antiquity. So the however was just brought to the end. Remember, adverbials are mobile. So adverbials can occur at the beginning, at the end, or in the middle. I could have said they were not, however, they were not the first, however, in England to adopt the literary modes of classical. So adverbials like however and co are mobile, and in this case, it's occurring at the end. It's C. It's not D. Obviously, it's not A or B. It is C. It is not D because the however does not accompany some of the most prominent figures of the earlier. It ends, they were not the first. So the semicolon is just there to allow for an introduction of a new independent clause. You can separate an independent clause with a comma and or a semicolon. You're separating two independent clauses in a compound sentence, without a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or a semicolon. A colon can also serve a role here, but this is only when you're introducing an explanation or a list. All right, let's proceed. 25. English poet and Shakespeare contemporary John Donne's dash,
much admired during his lifetime and decades that followed, had at the time of their enthusiastic discovery. So you see, this one is trying to test your knowledge of um, um sentence structure as well. English poet and Shakespeare contemporary John Donne's dash works. If you say we're much admired, obviously this is not correct. This is not correct either. So it's A or B, C. If you say we're much admired during his lifetime and in the decades that followed, had at the time of the enthusiastic rediscovery by the early 20th century, when it's been essentially gathering dust for the intervening 20, years, you would be implying that there are two finite verbs here, and it will be difficult to divide this into a sentence structure. Like, is it a complex sentence? Is it a compound sentence? So from here to here is just a modifier, a participial. English poet and Shakespeare contemporary John Donne's works, much admired during his lifetime and in the decades that followed, had at the time of their enthusiastic rediscovery by the early 20th century modernists been essentially gathering dust for the intervening two. This is just one sentence. So you cannot have two finite verbs. So it is C. It is C. English poet and Shakespeare contemporary John Donne's works, much admired during his lifetime and in the decades that followed. This is not a verb, I hope you know. This is a non-finite verb, rather. It's not a finite verb, so it doesn't indicate a clause. English poet and Shakespeare contemporary John Donne's works, much admired during his lifetime and decades that followed, had, this is the first verb, finite verb that shows tense, had been essentially gathering. Don't let the fact that it is divided. It's a non-essential, what's it called now? Clause. At the time of the it's not even a clause, it's a phrase. It's a non-essential phrase. So it's had been essentially gathering. This is the first final verb, had been essentially gathering. So it's C. 26, compared to that of alumina glass, dash silica glass atoms are so far apart that they are unable to reform bonds after being separated. So compared to that of alumina glass, so compared to that of, you're not comparing to alumina glass, you're comparing to that of alumina glass. So something of alumina glass, you're comparing to something in silica glass. Dash silica glass atoms are so far apart that they are unable to reform. So which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the convention of standard English? A. Silica glass is at a significant advantage due to its more dispersed atomic arrangement compared to that of alumina glass. Silica glass is not correct. Silica glass has a more dispersed atomic significant advantage.
All right. So compared to that of aluminous glass, something of aluminous glass, what is that something? silica glass's atomic arrangement. So it is the atomic arrangement that you're comparing. Compared to that, what is that? The atomic arrangement. You're not comparing silica glass to alumina glass. You're comparing the atomic arrangement of alumina glass to silica glass. So compared to that of alumina glass, silica glass's atomic arrangement is more dispersed, resulting in a significant advantage. Do you get it? So there's a full stop here, then a new sentence. Silica glass atomic atoms are so far apart. So you're comparing that. That's why D is correct. 27. In November 1934, Amrita Shergill was living in what must have seemed like the ideal city for a young artist, Paris. She was studying first-hand the color-saturated style of Francis Bodin's masters and beginning to make a name for herself as a painter. Shergill longed to return to her childhood home of India. This is very obvious, right? Very, very obvious. Because it says she was in a different country learning something, and the next sentence mentions something contradictory or something that concedes. Watch the video um, on transition words again. If you've forgotten, there are transition words that concede. So yes, she's learning and she's gaining a lot in the city, and she likes the city Paris. She longed to return, so it is still not therefore, not indeed, not furthermore. 28. In 1974, Mexican chemist Mario Molina and US chemist F. Sherwood Rowland discovered that chemicals called CFCs were harmful to the ozone layer. So their research was extremely influential in the fight against CFCs. It laid the foundation for a 1987 treaty that phased out the use of CFCs across the globe. So they found out that CFCs are harmful, and their research was influential in the fight against CFCs. It laid the foundation that led to the phasing out of CFCs. So it's not regardless, it's not specifically. It could be specifically. Was extremely influential in the fight against CFCs. It's not, however, it's not earlier, it should be specifically. It says it specifically laid the foundation. So that was how significant, how influential it was in phasing out CFCs. Alright, 29, still on transitions. With his room-sized installation, Unicorn, My Private Sky, Norwegian artist Bo Suther succeeds in creating a whimsical yet perplexing experience. When visitors set foot inside the fantastically blue room and encounter the life-size stuffed unicorn printing at the far end of it. They are both dazzled and confused. It's not second. It's not instead. So nevertheless, it's indeed. So because the next sentence proves or buttresses the previous one, so it should be indeed, not any of the others. Number 30. The student wants to emphasize the distance covered by the Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike. This is what he wants to emphasize, the distance covered by the Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Let's read the notes. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was a road built between 1792 and 1794. This does not talk about the distance. It was the first private turnpike in the United States. Doesn't talk about the distance. It connected the cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster in the state of Pennsylvania. Doesn't talk about distance. It was 62 miles long. So this talks about the distance. Now let's check. Remember, it wants to emphasize the distance covered. The 62-mile long Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike connected Pennsylvania
cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was the first. Nope. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike, which connected two, was built. No. A historic Pennsylvania road, and nah, it's a because you see it emphasizes the distance covered. In English, in statistics, this is called for thematization. When you put what you want to pay attention to, or you want to give what you want to give prominence to first before the rest of the sentence. The 62-mile long. All right. The student wants. This is 31 now. The student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So he wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. So let's look for the aim of the research study. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Most, but not all, of the moon's oxygen comes from the sun via solar wind. Cosmochemist Kentaro Terida from Osaka University wondered if some of the unaccounted for oxygen could be coming from Earth. In 2008, he analyzed data from the Japanese satellite Kaguya. Kaguya gathered data about gases and particles it encountered while orbiting the moon. Based on the Kaguya data, Terada confirmed his suspicion that Earth is sending oxygen to the Earth to the moon. So look at it says it wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. This is the aim. Wondered if some of the unaccounted for oxygen could be coming from Earth. The unaccounted oxygen could be coming from. So that's what he analyzed data from the Japanese satellite Kaguya for. Some of the unaccounted for oxygen could be coming from the Earth. So let's check. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? A. As it orbited the moon, the Kaguya satellite collected data that was later analyzed. Nope. 4008, Kentaro Terada wondered if the moon was receiving some of its oxygen from Earth. Cosmochemist Kentaro Terada set out to determine whether some of the moon's oxygen was coming from. Before 2008, let's check. In 2008, okay. Terada wondered if the moon was receiving some of its oxygen from Earth. Cosmochemist Kentaro Terada set out to determine whether some of the moon's oxygen was coming from Earth. So it's obviously not D either. So it's a choice of words that may be causing a problem here. I think it's C because it says the student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study, not the assumption before the research study. So cosmochemist Kentaro Terada set out to determine whether some of the moon's oxygen was coming from the Earth. This is better. This is better put to relate to the aim. So it's C. All right, 32. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. All right. Excuse me. Okay. Has taken the following notes. The student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. So wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Let's check. The factors that affect clutch size, the number of eggs laid at one time, have been well studied in birds but not in lizards. A team led by Shai Meri of Tel Aviv University investigated which factors influence lizard clutch size. Meri's team obtained clutch size and habitat data for over 3,900 lizard species, analyzed the data with statistical models. Larger clutch size was associated with environments in higher latitudes that have more seasonal change. Lizards in higher latitude environments may lay larger clutches to take advantage of shorter windows of environmental conditions.
So emphasize the aim of the research study. This is the aim. Which factors influence lizard clutch size? So A, researchers wanted to know which factors influence lizard egg clutch size because such factors have been well studied in bears but not in lizards. I think this is correct. After they obtained data, nope. We now know, no. Closest limited data for over, no. So it's A. Emphasize the aim. It doesn't matter if the B, C, and D are true based on the passage. What matters is, does it use relevant information from the notes to accomplish the goal of emphasizing the aim of the research study? So 32 is A. 33. The student wants to make a generalization about the kind of study conducted by Glickman, Brown, and Sung. Remember, a generalization about something. About what? The kind of study. He wants to make a generalization about the kind of study. Now let's read. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. British musicians John Lennon and Paul McCartney shared writing credits for numerous Beatles songs. Many Lennon-McCartney songs were actually written by either Lennon or McCartney, not by both. The exact authorship of specific parts of many Beatles songs, such as the verse for "In My Life," is disputed. Mark Glickman, remember the kind of study conducted by Glickman, Brown, and Sung. Mark Glickman, Jason Brown, and Ryan Sung used statistical methods to analyze the musical content of Beatles song. Kind of study. So the kind of study is that they use statistical methods to analyze the musical content of Beatles songs. So they concluded that there is 18.9% probability that McCartney wrote. This does not talk about the kind of study. So let's check. A. Based on statistical analysis, Glickman, Brown, and Sung claim that John Lennon wrote the verse of "In My Life." They concluded that there is 18.9% probability that McCartney wrote the verse. So 18.9. That means it was Lennon that wrote it. Okay. There is only an 18.9% probability that Paul. This is true according to the passage, but it doesn't talk about the kind of study. It is likely that researchers have used statistical methods to address questions of authorship within the field of music. It is D. That's why I was careful to pick A, because A says they claim that John Lennon wrote it, and that's not true. They did not claim he wrote it. They just said it was consistent with his style. So the truth is, the researchers have used statistical methods. Remember, it is the methods, the kind of study that is the focus. The student wants to make generalization about the kind of study. So you see, it starts with researchers have used statistical methods. Remember what I said here about thematization and prominence. When you start with a specific sentence, the 62-mile-long Philadelphia. So you see, when you start with a specific expression, it gives prominence to that particular thing. So the fact that they started with researchers have used statistical methods is a clue to address questions of authorship within the field of music. So that's basically how to take the SAT test. When you're practicing on your own, apply the same strategies and you'll see improvements. Alright, it's been a long video. Thank you for sticking to the end and see you in the next video. Bye.